The room was buzzing with chatter. People laughed and clinked their glasses, waiting for the next performance to start. It was just a small talent showcase, nothing fancy, but for the locals, it was a chance to enjoy a quiet evening and see some hidden talent. Most of the crowd wasn't expecting anything extraordinary. They had come for a few songs, maybe a few jokes, and the usual light entertainment that filled these kinds of events. No one knew that tonight would be different. In the corner of the room, she waited quietly. She didn't stand out. She wasn't wearing anything flashy or attention-grabbing. She just looked like someone who belonged to the audience rather than the stage. She adjusted her sleeves, took a deep breath, and checked her music sheet one last time. Her heart was racing, but she hid it well. No one could tell from the calm expression on her face. She smiled softly to herself, remembering all the times she had dreamed of this moment. The announcer called her name. A few people glanced up, then went back to their conversations. Some even whispered, "Who is she? She doesn't look like a professional." A few others snickered quietly, thinking this would be an easy, forgettable performance. That was exactly what made her nervous and determined at the same time. She knew she had talent, but she also knew that tonight, she would have to show it to people who didn't believe in her. She walked to the stage slowly, almost casually. Her steps were light but certain. There was no dramatic entrance, no exaggerated gestures. Just a quiet confidence that came from years of practice and patience. The stage lights were bright, and they made the small performance area look much larger than it really was. The audience didn't give her much attention at first. They were too busy chatting, sipping drinks, and making small bets on what kind of performance they would get. She approached the piano. It was an old instrument, a little worn out, but she didn't mind. She had practiced on far worse. She ran her fingers gently over the keys, feeling their texture and remembering the countless nights she had spent practicing in silence. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe. She knew that once she played the first note, there would be no going back. The audience still hadn't fully noticed her. A few people whispered again, thinking she might fumble or play something simple. Some thought she looked too ordinary to be impressive. Their expectations were low, and that was exactly what made this moment so critical. She had a chance to change everything in just a few minutes. She opened her eyes and looked at the crowd. It wasn't a gaze of fear or doubt. It was a calm, steady look that seemed to say, "I'm ready." She took a seat on the piano bench, adjusted herself, and positioned her fingers above the keys. Her fingers were trembling slightly, but it wasn't from fear. It was excitement. The kind of excitement that only comes when someone is about to show their true potential to the world. As she began to play, the room stayed noisy for a few seconds. Some people didn't even realize she had started. A few were still talking, laughing, and sipping their drinks. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the first notes began to cut through the chatter. There was a softness to the sound, a clarity that caught the attention of anyone who was listening carefully. Her fingers moved gracefully, each note deliberate, each pause intentional. The music wasn't loud or flashy, but it had a presence that demanded attention. Something shifted in the room. People started noticing, their conversations slowing down. One by one, the whispers faded. The tapping of fingers on glasses and the rustling of chairs seemed to fade into the background. The melody was simple at first, gentle, almost like a whisper, but it had a strange power. It drew people in. The kind of power that makes you stop what you're doing and just listen. The woman's eyes were closed now. She wasn't thinking about the audience or the room. She was thinking only of the music. Every note carried a story. Every chord held a memory. She remembered the late nights when she practiced alone in her room, the small triumphs when she finally mastered a difficult piece, and the moments when she thought about giving up but didn't. All that emotion flowed into her performance. And it showed. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. They weren't sure what they were hearing. It was more than skill, it was emotion, and it was raw. Some looked at each other in surprise, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others stopped mid-drink, their attention fully captured. The music seemed to reach the corners of the room, touching everyone in a different way. Some felt a tingle of excitement, others felt a quiet ache of nostalgia. The woman kept playing, her focus unbroken. She didn't need applause or cheers. She didn't need anyone to notice her effort. This moment was hers, and she gave it everything she had. The notes flowed naturally as if they were a part of her. Every chord was perfect, not because it was technically flawless, but because it carried her story. It carried years of practice, patience, and quiet determination. Slowly, the room became silent. People stopped talking completely. The small event space, once filled with casual chatter and laughter, was now holding its breath. They had underestimated her. They had assumed this would be easy, ordinary, and forgettable. But in just a few minutes, that assumption was being proven completely wrong. The energy in the room shifted. People were leaning forward in their seats, watching her hands glide over the keys. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty of her performance. The woman didn't pause. She continued to play, each note a little bolder than the last. She added subtle flourishes that made the music come alive. The once small, quiet room now felt filled with her presence. People started to nod, subtly at first, then more openly, acknowledging the skill and emotion they had overlooked at the start. The initial whispers of doubt and underestimation were gone, replaced by a quiet awe. She could feel the room changing, the energy shifting. What had started as a casual, underestimated moment was becoming something bigger. She didn't think about it consciously, but she could sense it. The music had a life of its own, and the audience was following it, completely entranced. Every note was a story, and everyone in the room was listening. By the time she finished the first piece, the room was fully captivated. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to clap or remain quiet. They had not expected this. Not from someone who looked so ordinary, who had walked onto the stage with such calm and simplicity. They had assumed it would be easy, just another performance to pass the time. And yet, here she was, proving that talent can appear in the most unexpected places. She took a small breath, readying herself for the next piece. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, but there was no hesitation. She had captured the attention of the room, but more importantly, she had captured her own moment. Years of quiet effort, struggle, and dedication had led to this exact point. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was good. She already knew, but seeing the room change, seeing people's surprise and admiration, brought a quiet satisfaction that she had never felt before. She continued. The audience began to react. Small smiles appeared on faces, some people leaned forward, and others simply closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. It was a gentle transformation. A room that had been casual, dismissive, and skeptical was now fully engaged. Every expectation that had existed before she started playing had been shattered in the most beautiful way, and in that moment, it wasn't about applause, recognition, or even winning a competition. It was about proving something to herself and quietly showing the world that talent isn't always obvious. It can be hidden behind a calm exterior, waiting for the right moment to shine. Tonight, that moment had arrived. The woman finished the first piece, letting the final note linger in the air. The silence was thick and full of awe. People looked at her not with skepticism, but with surprise and admiration. Some were whispering, trying to process what they had just heard. Others simply nodded as if words couldn't describe what they were feeling. And she smiled softly, taking it all in. This was the beginning, and she already knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. Before she stepped onto the stage, her life had been full of quiet moments that few people noticed. People often assumed she had an easy, ordinary life, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. Every day had its challenges. She worked hard, often juggling multiple responsibilities just to keep herself moving forward. Some days were exhausting, and some nights were spent in small, lonely rooms where she practiced her music in silence. These were moments no one ever saw. These were the moments that built the foundation of her talent. The moments that shaped her determination. Her story began not with applause or recognition, but with small beginnings. As a child, she loved music more than anything else. She didn't have a lot of money, and there were no fancy instruments or teachers in her home. Sometimes she would sit at an old, slightly out-of-tune piano at a community center and try to play simple songs she had heard on the radio or learned from books. Other children were playing outside, running and laughing, but she preferred to stay inside and practice. It wasn't that she wanted to be different, it was just that music made her feel alive in a way. Nothing else could. She faced obstacles from the very beginning. People often told her that music wasn't a practical path, that she should focus on something more realistic. Teachers sometimes ignored her because she didn't fit the image of a serious student or a natural prodigy. Friends would tease her for spending hours at the piano instead of hanging out or having fun. But she didn't let those voices stop her. She quietly believed in herself even when no one else did. She practiced in secret, often late at night when the house was quiet. The small sounds of her piano playing would fill the room, and she would lose herself in the melodies. There were times when she felt frustrated, when her fingers wouldn't move the way she wanted, or when a piece seemed impossible to master. But she never gave up. Each small victory, each note that finally sounded right, gave her a little more confidence. She started to understand that talent wasn't just about natural ability. It was about persistence, focus, and the willingness to keep trying. Even when it seemed impossible, along the way, she had experienced moments of doubt. There were times when she wondered if anyone would ever notice her, if her music would ever reach beyond the walls of her small practice room. Sometimes she would imagine herself performing in front of a large audience, and the dream felt both exciting and impossible. The fear of failure was real, but it never became overwhelming. She learned to use it as motivation. Every time she played a piece perfectly, she felt a small spark of hope that maybe someday she could share her music with the world. Her life was not all struggle, of course. She found small joys in ordinary things. A sunny afternoon, the sound of birds outside her window, or the quiet satisfaction of finishing a challenging piece, all of these gave her comfort. She also had people who quietly supported her. A neighbor who offered her extra piano lessons when she was young. A coworker who listened to her talk about music, or even strangers who smiled when they heard her play. These moments reminded her that even if recognition was rare, the love for her craft was enough to keep her going. By the time she grew older, her music had become more than a hobby, it was a part of who she was. She knew that it had the power to move people, even if she hadn't yet seen it. But life continued with its practical demands. She worked jobs that paid the bills, often long hours that left her tired, but she never stopped practicing. Early mornings and late nights became her routine. Sometimes she would be exhausted from work and think she couldn't play that night, but she always found a way. Music was her escape, her therapy, and her voice when words weren't enough. Even though she was used to performing alone in private spaces, the idea of performing in front of an audience was intimidating. She had done it a few times in small community events, but nothing like the talent showcase that awaited her tonight. Still, the challenges she had faced in her life, loneliness, doubt, hard work, and perseverance had prepared her more than she realized. Every mistake she had made, every failure she had endured, had shaped her ability to handle pressure. She understood that this moment was bigger than herself, but she also knew that it was a moment she had earned through years of effort. Her practice wasn't just about learning music, it was about learning patience and resilience. Sometimes she would spend hours on a single measure, over and over again, until her fingers were sore and her eyes were tired. Other times she would struggle to understand a piece, thinking she would never get it right. But then, after days of persistence, the piece would finally click, and the sense of achievement would feel incredible. That process taught her that mastery wasn't about being naturally gifted, it was about dedication, focus, and refusing to give up. There were also moments of inspiration that pushed her further. She would listen to recordings of great musicians, not to compete but to learn and grow. She would imagine herself on a stage, feeling the energy of an audience, imagining the impact her music could have on someone's heart. These thoughts kept her motivated even on the hardest days. They reminded her that her dream, while challenging, was worth pursuing. Her family and friends didn't always understand her passion. Some thought she should focus on a real job, while others didn't see the value in pursuing something so intangible. She didn't let that discourage her. Instead, she quietly balanced her responsibilities with her passion. She worked, she practiced, and she dreamed all at the same time. This balance wasn't easy, but it taught her discipline, focus, and the value of small victories. By the time the night of the talent showcase arrived, she had spent years building herself up quietly, unseen by most people. Those years of effort, of struggle, of determination, had shaped her into someone capable of turning heads with a single performance. She wasn't seeking recognition for its own sake. She wanted to share a piece of herself through her music. That desire, more than skill alone, is what gave her the strength to step onto the stage and face an audience that underestimated her. Tonight was not just a performance. It was the culmination of her life's work. Every note she played would carry a story, every pause a reflection of the struggles she had endured. And she knew that while the audience might not understand her journey, they would feel it through the music. The quiet determination that had carried her through countless nights of practice was about to meet the surprise of a crowd that had no idea what was coming. As she waited for her turn, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the nights when she felt too tired to practice but pushed through anyway. She thought of the small successes that gave her hope when everything else seemed difficult. She remembered the people who doubted her, and she used that doubt as fuel. All of it had led her to this moment, the point where she could finally share her gift, not just for herself, but for everyone willing to listen. Her story wasn't about instant success or natural talent alone. It was about persistence, resilience, and the courage to keep going despite the odds. It was about believing in oneself when the world doesn't seem to notice. And as she walked to the stage that night, she carried all of that with her. Every step was a quiet victory, every breath a reminder of how far she had come. When she sat at the piano and lifted her fingers to the keys, it wasn't just a performance about music, it was a performance about life. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness more than talent. They were about to see the result of years of unseen effort, quiet determination, and a heart that refused to give up. And that, more than anything else, was what made her performance unforgettable. The room was quiet now, but it hadn't started that way. At first, the audience didn't pay much attention. They were still chatting, laughing, and thinking this would be just another simple performance. But then it happened, the first note. She pressed the key, and it was as if the room suddenly held its breath. The note wasn't loud, but it was clear, delicate, and perfect. It was the kind of sound that makes people stop what they're doing, makes them look up, and forces them to listen. Those who were whispering moments ago froze mid-conversation. The air felt different, almost electric. For a moment, no one moved. The music was soft, yet it had a power that couldn't be ignored. Her fingers moved carefully, yet with confidence. Each note was chosen, deliberate, and full of feeling. She didn't rush. She let the music breathe, and in doing so, she made the audience lean in. Some people's eyebrows rose in surprise. They hadn't expected that. They had thought this would be easy, ordinary, maybe even forgettable. And now, here she was, changing everything with a single note. The melody grew slowly, unfolding like a story. Each chord built on the last, creating a rhythm that felt alive. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the music. This wasn't just about playing the right notes. It was about expressing everything she had kept inside for years. Every late night, every moment of doubt, every small victory, she poured it all into her performance. The audience could feel it, even if they didn't know why. There was emotion in every pause, every soft touch of a key. Some people in the crowd shifted in their seats. They weren't sure what they were hearing, but they knew it was something special. A few faces softened as if memories or feelings were being stirred by the music. Others leaned forward, completely absorbed. Even the judges, who had been skeptical moments before, leaned closer to watch. Their pens paused over their score sheets, their eyes fixed on her hands. Something extraordinary was happening, and everyone in the room sensed it. The woman didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. She was focused entirely on the piano, on the music, on the story she was telling. Her body moved naturally with the rhythm, her fingers gliding over the keys effortlessly. She didn't think about impressing anyone. She just played, and that made it even more powerful. The music wasn't forced, it was real, and that authenticity touched everyone in the room. A few people had stopped breathing without realizing it. The music wrapped around them, gentle at first, then building with intensity. There were moments of softness that made the heart ache a little, moments of bold chords that made it race. She was telling a story with each note, and the audience could feel the journey. This was more than skill. It was emotion, experience, and soul all coming together. She had reached the middle of her piece, and now the melody was becoming more complex. Her fingers moved faster, yet with precision. The notes were no longer just a song, they were a conversation, a connection between her and the room. People who had been skeptical now whispered to each other in disbelief. "Did she just—" One murmured. "I didn't expect this," said another. Their voices were quiet, almost reverent. No one wanted to interrupt the magic that had begun with that very first note. The energy in the room was changing. What had started as casual curiosity was now full attention. People who had been half-heartedly watching were now leaning in, trying to catch every movement, every sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music take them somewhere else. Some smiled softly, feeling joy they didn't even realize they needed. And some wiped away tears, moved by the depth and beauty of her performance. She didn't notice the effect she was having. She didn't look at the audience, didn't glance at the judges, didn't think about the applause that would come later. She was completely absorbed in the music, letting it flow through her. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. She knew exactly what she wanted to express, and she trusted herself to do it. That trust, earned through years of quiet practice and determination, allowed her to perform with a freedom that was rare and captivating. As the piece progressed, the room became completely silent. Even the small sounds, the shuffle of feet, the clinking of glasses, the coughs had disappeared. Everyone was listening. Every person in that space was experiencing the music in their own way, but all were united in attention and admiration. The ordinary expectation of the audience, that this would be a simple, easy performance, had been completely shattered. She reached a part of the piece that was particularly challenging. Her fingers moved in a rapid, intricate pattern that required focus and control. But she didn't hesitate or falter. Each note rang out perfectly, clear and confident. A few people in the audience gasped softly, unable to hide their amazement. The judges exchanged glances, their eyes wide with surprise. They had seen many performers before, but none had captured the room like this. None had turned a casual event into something extraordinary. Even the quietest members of the audience were now paying attention. People who had been distracted, scrolling on phones or talking to neighbors, were now fully engaged. Some were sitting forward in their chairs, some were holding their breath, and some simply closed their eyes, letting the music take over. The woman's performance had a way of drawing people in, slowly at first, then completely, until all they could do was listen and feel. There were moments of contrast in the music, soft, tender notes followed by strong, confident chords. She used silence as much as sound, allowing pauses to stretch and hang in the air. Each pause made the next note more powerful. The audience felt every rise and fall, every tension and release. It was as if the room itself had transformed into part of the performance. The music wasn't just coming from the piano, it was coming from her experience, her emotion, and her years of preparation. The first half of the piece ended with a gentle flourish, a soft series of notes that seemed to echo in the air. The audience didn't applaud yet. They were too stunned, too captivated. There was a moment of silence, almost like the world itself was holding its breath, before the music continued seamlessly into the next section. She didn't pause for effect. She let the story continue naturally. That seamless flow made the performance even more mesmerizing. Now, the music grew bolder. She added more complex chords, faster movements, and subtle nuances that only someone with true understanding could master. Her fingers moved effortlessly, almost dancing across the keys. The audience could feel the excitement, the tension, and the emotion building. Some people leaned forward so far it was as if they wanted to get closer to the source of the magic. Others simply closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. Feeling a mix of awe and joy that was difficult to put into words, every note she played told a story. The audience could sense her journey, her struggles, her late nights, and her quiet determination. Even though no one in the room knew her personally, they could feel the weight of her experiences through the music. It was a rare kind of performance, one that transcended skill and touched the heart. People weren't just listening, they were feeling, reacting, and connecting with something deeper than the notes themselves. By the end of this part of the piece, the room was completely absorbed. The casual audience members who had come expecting a simple, easy performance were now captivated. The judges were leaning forward, pens forgotten. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as a quiet, underestimated performance had become something extraordinary. The music had transformed the space, turning an ordinary evening into a moment no one would forget. She played with confidence. Yet there was a softness to her expression. She didn't need to show off. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The music itself was enough to communicate everything she wanted to say, and the audience, sensing the authenticity and passion behind each note, responded with full attention and admiration. They weren't just watching, they were experiencing the story she had to tell. Note by note, as she finished the next section, the room remained silent, hanging on every last sound. Some people held their breath, not wanting to break the spell. Others simply stared at her hands, marveling at the skill and precision. The effect of her performance was clear. She had captured the attention of everyone in the room, and she wasn't done yet. There was more to come, more to express, more to astonish. And everyone knew, even if they didn't yet realize it, that this performance would be remembered for a long time. In that moment, she wasn't just playing music. She was telling her story, sharing her journey, and showing the world what quiet dedication and talent could achieve. Every note carried years of effort, resilience, and determination. Every pause held the weight of experience. And the audience, completely absorbed, could feel it all. They were witnessing not just a performance, but a triumph, the triumph of someone who had quietly worked for years and was now revealing her brilliance to the world. By now, the room was completely transformed. The casual, easygoing atmosphere that had greeted her at the start of the evening had vanished. People were no longer chatting or glancing around at their phones. They were fully focused on her, captivated by a performance that had begun quietly but now demanded their full attention. Every note she played drew them in further, pulling them deeper into the story she was telling through the piano. At first, the audience had underestimated her. They had thought this would be a light, forgettable performance. They had whispered and joked quietly, assuming she would be simple and ordinary. But now, every expectation had been shattered. She wasn't just playing music. She was creating an experience that no one could ignore. Even those who had doubted her talent could no longer deny the impact of what they were witnessing. Her fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with precision and grace. Each note was intentional, and every chord carried emotion that resonated throughout the room. The music seemed to fill every corner of the space, wrapping itself around the audience like an invisible thread connecting everyone in shared awe. Some people leaned forward, resting their elbows on their knees, completely absorbed. Others closed their eyes, letting the melodies wash over them and evoke emotions they hadn't expected to feel. A few audience members whispered to each other, trying to express their surprise. Did she just... One began, but they trailed off, unsure how to put the performance into words. Some could only nod in silent agreement, eyes wide with admiration. The subtle energy in the room had grown into something tangible. People were leaning in, not wanting to miss a single moment of the music that had taken over the space. Even the judges, who had been neutral at first, were now on the edge of their seats, eyes following every movement of her hands with astonishment. The piece she was playing had entered its most intense section. Fast notes moved in intricate patterns, each one precise yet flowing naturally from the last. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy of the music. People could feel the tension and release, the rise and fall of emotion carried in every note. Some gasped quietly at the complexity, while others simply held their breath. Unwilling to interrupt the spell she had created, her body moved with the rhythm, swaying slightly, her fingers flying across the keys with skill and confidence. Yet there was no arrogance in her performance. There was only expression, honesty, and passion. Every note told a story. Every chord spoke of her journey, her struggles, and the years of quiet, unseen effort that had led her here. The audience could feel it all. They might not have known her story, but her music communicated it perfectly. Reaching them in ways words never could, the room had become silent, except for the piano. Every sound outside of her playing had disappeared, the murmurs, the rustle of clothing, the clink of glasses. People were holding their breath, caught in the moment, fully aware that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. Those who had been skeptical, those who had expected easy or forgettable, were now in complete awe. They could no longer see her as ordinary. She had transformed the space with her talent, presence, and emotional depth. Her music had a magnetic quality, pulling the audience closer with every passing second. Some people unconsciously leaned in, trying to absorb every note, every subtle nuance. Others felt chills, as if the music was speaking directly to their hearts. There were moments of quiet reflection in the melody, moments that made the audience pause and think about their own lives, their own emotions. And then there were crescendos so powerful that the room seemed to come alive with energy, almost as if the walls themselves were vibrating with the music. She was now fully in her element. Years of practice, perseverance, and determination had prepared her for this exact moment. She didn't need to think about the audience, about the applause, or about whether she would impress anyone. Her focus was on the music itself, on telling the story that only she could tell. And the audience, sensing the authenticity and depth of her performance, responded in kind, captivated by her every movement and sound. Some people began to smile, unable to contain their admiration. Others leaned back, eyes closed, lost in the melodies. A few had tears in their eyes, quietly moved by the emotion conveyed through her music. She wasn't just playing notes. She was connecting with people on a level that went beyond words. The audience felt her journey, her triumphs, her struggles, and her quiet victories, all expressed in the universal language of music. The piece reached its most dramatic section. Fast, complex notes flowed seamlessly, interwoven with powerful chords and delicate harmonies. Her fingers moved like lightning, precise yet fluid, each note landing perfectly. The room seemed to vibrate with anticipation, energy, and awe. People were holding their breath, leaning forward, unable to look away. Even those who had come expecting a simple, casual performance were now fully engaged. Caught in the spell she had cast, some members of the audience whispered to one another, trying to describe what they were feeling. "I can't believe this," one said quietly. It's amazing." Others simply shook their heads in disbelief, unable to articulate the emotions stirred within them. The energy in the room was palpable, a shared experience that connected everyone in silent recognition of the talent and emotion before them. She played on, unbroken, unhesitant, and unshaken. Her focus never wavered. She was fully immersed in the music, completely present in the moment. Her performance was no longer just about technique, it was about expression, emotion, and storytelling. She was telling her life story without saying a word, sharing her journey and her heart through every note. And the audience could feel it. Deeply and unmistakably, the dynamics of the piece shifted again, moving from powerful, fast passages to soft, tender moments that held everyone's attention in rapt silence. She played with subtlety, allowing the music to breathe, giving the audience space to absorb the emotion. Each pause was intentional, each delicate note deliberate. People leaned forward instinctively, sensing the significance of every sound. Some closed their eyes to fully experience it, while others watched her hands, mesmerized by the skill and emotion at play. By this point, the audience was fully captivated. Their previous doubts, skepticism, and underestimation had completely vanished. What had begun as a casual performance had transformed into something extraordinary. They were no longer spectators, they were participants in an experience that touched the heart, mind, and soul. The room had become a shared space of emotion, energy, and awe, all centered around the music she was creating. As the piece approached its final moments, the intensity grew. The music swelled with emotion, building to a climax that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, executing each note flawlessly, yet with passion and feeling. The energy in the room surged, a mix of admiration, awe, and pure excitement. People who had doubted her now cheered internally, silently celebrating the talent they had underestimated. And then, in a final series of notes, she brought the piece to a gentle, breathtaking conclusion. The last chord lingered in the air, resonating in the hearts of everyone present. Silence followed for a moment, thick with awe and disbelief. No one spoke. No one moved. The room held its breath, savoring the impact of what they had just experienced. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys, allowing the final note to fade naturally. She didn't rush to claim applause, didn't need validation. She had shared her story, her passion, and her heart. And the audience, now fully aware of her skill and dedication, responded with admiration, respect, and awe. This was more than a performance. It was a revelation, a moment where expectations were completely overturned, and ordinary assumptions about talent were shattered. The crowd began to react slowly at first soft claps, murmurs of astonishment, eyes wide with admiration. And then the applause grew louder, filling the room with energy and excitement. People were standing, cheering, and clapping, some even whistling in amazement. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something unexpected, and they couldn't contain their admiration. The music had not only captured their attention, it had captured their hearts. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She didn't need to acknowledge the applause immediately. The performance itself was the reward. But the energy, the recognition, and the admiration from the audience reminded her that years of dedication, struggle, and persistence had led to this moment. It wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about sharing her passion, her story, and her talent with the world. And knowing that it had reached the hearts of those who had once underestimated her. By the end of her performance, the room was completely transformed. The audience had been taken on a journey of skill, emotion, and authenticity. Their initial skepticism and low expectations had been replaced with respect, admiration, and inspiration. They had witnessed a quiet, ordinary woman reveal extraordinary talent, and the impact would stay with them long after the final note faded. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder, filling the small event space with energy, excitement, and astonishment. People were on their feet now, clapping and cheering, some whistling, others calling out words of praise. The performance had started as a quiet, unassuming moment, and yet it had become a spectacle that no one could ignore. The room that had been casual, skeptical, and distracted was now alive with admiration and awe. Everyone had been touched by what they had just witnessed. She sat at the piano for a moment, letting the final note linger in the air, taking it all in. The energy of the room was overwhelming, but in a good way. She felt a mix of relief, joy, and quiet pride. This was the moment she had worked for, not for fame or recognition, but for the chance to share her passion and her story. All those years of practice, struggle, and patience had led to this exact point, and it had been worth every single late night, every moment of doubt, and every small triumph that no one else had noticed. People were approaching her now, eager to express their admiration. Some came forward with smiles, shaking their heads in disbelief. "That was incredible," one whispered. "I didn't expect that at all," said another. People wanted to know who she was, how she had learned to play with such skill, and where she had been hiding this talent all their lives. For the first time, she realized that her quiet dedication had finally been seen. And it mattered. Even the judges, who had been professional and reserved throughout the evening, were standing, clapping, and exchanging looks of surprise. They were impressed, not just by the technical skill, but by the emotion and authenticity of her performance. One of them nodded appreciatively, making a note in a way that showed more than just scoring, it was respect. acknowledgement of her years of effort and talent that had finally shone through. This wasn't just a passing performance. It was a statement. The audience was still reacting. People were talking excitedly, reliving their favorite moments of the piece, describing how certain notes had made them feel chills or brought tears to their eyes. Some were replaying in their minds the subtle movements of her hands, the delicate pauses, the way the music had flowed so effortlessly yet carried so much emotion. The energy was contagious, spreading from person to person, filling the room with a shared feeling of admiration and wonder. She stood slowly from the piano bench, taking a moment to bow slightly. The applause intensified. People were standing now, cheering, clapping, and some were even cheering her name without knowing it. It was the kind of reaction that stays with you long after the performance is over, the kind of energy that makes you realize that what you have shared has truly reached people. And for her, that was everything. Recognition, fame, or validation had never been the goal. It was the connection, the shared emotion, and the knowledge that her effort had touched lives that mattered most. As the audience continued to cheer, she noticed a few people wiping away quiet tears. Their reactions weren't about the spectacle or showmanship, it was about feeling something real. Her performance had spoken to them in ways they couldn't articulate, stirring memories, emotions, and feelings that had been lying dormant. The power of music, when played with sincerity and passion, could reach deep into the heart, and that's exactly what she had done. People started to gather around, asking questions, wanting to know more about her journey. She shared bits of her story, the long nights, the quiet practice, the doubt, and the determination that had kept her going. They listened intently, amazed that someone who had seemed so ordinary could have such extraordinary talent. They asked where she had learned to play so well, and she explained honestly that it had been years of effort, persistence, and self-belief. There were no shortcuts, no magic, just dedication. The atmosphere was electric. People who had initially underestimated her were now the ones most amazed by her ability. They were whispering to each other, recounting moments from the performance, trying to express their astonishment. Some laughed softly at their own assumptions from earlier in the night. "We really didn't see that coming," one said. "I thought this would be easy, but wow. She's incredible." The room was alive with admiration, and it was clear that her performance had left a lasting impression. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment. This wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about knowing that her passion, dedication, and quiet work had finally been noticed. The years of practice in small, empty rooms had culminated in a moment of pure connection. She realized that the struggle, the patience, and the persistence had been necessary for this very moment. Every late night, every small sacrifice, every challenge had been preparing her for this instant, where her music could finally reach the hearts of others. People continued to approach her, some wanting to take pictures, some wanting autographs, others simply wanting to shake her hand and say thank you for sharing such a beautiful performance. She smiled warmly at each person, grateful not just for the recognition but for the connection they were offering. Her music had bridged the gap between her and the audience, creating a moment that went beyond words, beyond judgment, beyond expectation. The judges gathered around to give their final feedback. They spoke not just of technique, but of the emotion, the storytelling, and the way she had completely captured the room. One of them said quietly, "I've never seen a performance like this in my life. The way you made us feel, it was extraordinary." Another nodded in agreement, emphasizing that her music had not only met expectations, it had shattered them completely. It was clear that her talent had made an unforgettable mark. Even after the official applause ended, people lingered, talking about the performance in small groups, still filled with admiration. They replayed the experience in their minds, recalling the moments when her music had made them feel joy, sadness, or nostalgia. For many, it had been an emotional journey, a shared experience that went far beyond a simple evening of entertainment. And for her, knowing that she had touched so many hearts was more rewarding than any award, any recognition, or any praise could ever be. As she left the stage, people continued to cheer, and she realized that something inside her had shifted. This performance was more than a milestone, it was a turning point. She had proven, first to herself and then to the world, that dedication, patience, and belief in oneself could overcome doubt and underestimation. The applause, the admiration, and the awe were simply the echoes of years of effort finally being recognized. In the days that followed, the impact of her performance continued to unfold. People talked about it, shared it, and remembered it as something extraordinary. Invitations and opportunities started coming her way, not just because she had talent, but because she had shown courage, authenticity, and the willingness to share her heart through her music. Her quiet, ordinary life had transformed into one full of possibilities. Old because she had dared to step onto that stage and give everything she had, yet, despite all the attention, she remained humble. She knew that this was just one performance, one moment in a lifetime of work and growth. The recognition and admiration were wonderful, but what mattered most was the joy of performing, the connection she had made with the audience, and the proof to herself that persistence, dedication, and belief in one's passion could lead to incredible outcomes. The experience changed her perspective on life and on her own potential. She realized that the doubts, the struggles, and the long, quiet hours of practice were not obstacles, they were building blocks. They had prepared her for this exact moment where her talent could shine and touch others. And that understanding gave her confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet knowledge that she could face challenges, express herself fully, and continue to grow as a musician and as a person. As she reflected on the evening, she understood that her performance had been about more than just music. It had been about resilience, courage, and the power of quiet effort. It had been about showing that even when people underestimate you, your dedication and authenticity can create moments that change perception, touch hearts, and inspire others. She realized that her journey, with all its struggles and triumphs, had led her to this unforgettable moment, a moment where her music, her story, and her heart had met the world. And the world had responded with awe and admiration. The applause, the cheers, and the admiration from the audience became a memory she would cherish forever. But more importantly, she carried the knowledge that she had achieved something extraordinary, not because of luck or natural talent alone, but because of years of dedication, perseverance, and the willingness to keep going when it mattered most. She had turned skepticism into amazement, underestimation into recognition, and a quiet passion into a shared, unforgettable experience. Her life had changed that night, not just because of the recognition, but because she had proved to herself that she could rise above doubt, share her gift, and make an impact. That knowledge would stay with her forever, guiding her through future challenges, inspiring her to continue creating, and reminding her that persistence, passion, and authenticity could overcome any expectation, no matter how low it seemed at first.